Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Adriana told Christina more than once about the fate that befell her parents. From these stories, the girl knew that in her distant childhood, of which she had only vague, fragmentary memories, she had lived in a normal family with her mother and father. Her father was in business, and her mother was first a teacher and then a housewife. Kristen's father's business turned out to be so successful at one point that he had detractors, competitors. The character of her parents was inflexible and unyielding from that. He did not agree in any way to share their profits with anyone. His competitors, without thinking twice, they pooled their money and ordered his gangsters to put a homemade bomb in his car. That's how Kristen's parents died. She herself was barely 6 years old at the time. The girl was placed in an orphanage, and the property of her deceased parents was taken over by criminals, competitors. Adriana was an orphanage teacher Christina on the day the little lost girl was brought to them. She was on shift. Adriana shouted in a gruff voice, "Clara, nicknamed Brown from the emergency room to you new girl, pick up," and pushed forward. And the shaven-haired girl in the waiting rooms didn't take kindly to anyone. Rules are rules. You have to shave, treat for parasites, and disinfect. This is the one whose parents got blown up in the car. Remember? Carelessly threw Clara, not at all worried about the girl hearing her. They say he has 5 apartments and 2 cottages that have been peeled off. And the cars and clothes were countless. She wiped her nose, always red from her excessive fondness for the bottle. Oh, they're too much of a freeloader. Serves them right. Come here, Christina, accepting the documents, called the girl Adriana. Come on, do not be afraid. The little girl went obediently and dutifully. Without looking around, her eyes were directed to the floor. And what was going on around her, she did not care at all. Are you going to eat? Adriana asked sympathetically. Lunch is just over, but we're looking for something for you. She sat the girl down at the table and put a plate of rice porridge and meatballs in front of her. Eat up, honey. Here's some juice too. Christina did not move toward the food and still did not say a word, so she remained silent. For almost a year, she ate little. With other children did not play. And when in the fall she was assigned to the 1st grade, here at the orphanage she sat in class with exactly the same absent look, not touching anything and not responding to anything. Practically no one but Adriana cared at all. After the first week of school, the boarding school teacher, almost 70-year-old Vanessa, drew in her calligraphic handwriting in Christina's chart the unusually presumptive diagnosis of autism. A psychologist's counseling is required. What a load of crap. Autism will come up too. Adriana was indignant after reading these lines. Yes, the poor child is just in shock. Is it a joke that life turned around like that overnight? Oh, you poor thing, you are mine. She hugged the little Kristen by the shoulders affectionately. We have to do something with you. You'll go to a psychologist now. You'll have to. Christina looked up at her with big, serious eyes. She looked at her carefully, but said nothing as always. She only hugged herself closer to the one person who was giving her attention and warmth. She and Adriana had developed their own system of communication. If she wanted to answer in the affirmative, she shook her hand lightly. If negative, she put her eyes down. If she wanted something, she took Adriana's hand and pulled it to where the thing or object was. And she would point gently with her hand. Most of the time, Adriana the girl understood, but did not want to understand the other tutors and nannies, and poor Kristen often hurt. She was especially disliked by Brown, the nurse in the foster home. And when she had to replace the night duty, always mercilessly persecuted the poor girl, which scattered here like a queen. She would swing a dusty rag at the little girl, sitting with her feet up on a big chair near the window. Christina would often sit like this and just look outside, at the big birch tree that grew right in front of their playroom window, at the birds jumping up and down on her, on the low branches, at the frosty rain sitting outside the window, or at the frosty pattern and on the glass, in which she squeezed little holes with her warm finger. Don't you have anything else to do but touch the window with your finger? Brown yelled and chased the girl away. She obediently got up and went into the bedroom, lay down on her stomach on the bed, turned her head to the wall and lay there, Something silently whispered to herself with only her lips. But here too, Brown would not leave her alone for long. In broad daylight lay only Lazy. Go, do not have anything better to play with the children. Christina did not know how to play with children now. She vaguely remembered that a long time ago she had been in a similar place. Back then, too, there were a lot of children and caregivers, but all kind like Adriana. She had played there, walked there, slept in the same kind of crib, and then her mother would always come and take her home. But she never came again. Will the little girl wait for her mother? No one told her that, and she herself could not ask. The words were no longer coming out, not pronounced like they used to be. And there was no daddy either. There was only her, Christina, and her whole family was gone. And no one explained to her why or where. All she had to do was look out the window and wait for her mother to come. One shift, Adriana Christina was sitting by the big window again. The teacher herself was sitting at the desk with her back to the window, filling out endless statements. Suddenly, Betty. Someone shouted in an unfamiliar high voice behind her. Betty. Adriana turned around abruptly and saw the scene. Christina, the silent Christina, was standing with her feet on the windowsill, her gaze fixed on the bottom. Outside, I was in a state of great excitement. Betty, Betty. She shouted now and then, beating against the glass with a locked bird. Christina was frightened out of her wits. Adriana, come on, get down, come here. No, the girl screamed. There's no Betty. Who's Betty? Adriana asked, cautiously hugging the little girl by the waist. But she was silent, and only shook her head stubbornly from side to side. Finally, the tutor managed to pull the stubborn child down and sit her on her lap. The girl burst into tears, and sobbing kept repeating the same word, Betty. Betty. Adriana looked out the second-floor window of her group and saw a small, furry dog running merrily between the trees along Maple Alley. An elderly, well-dressed woman was pacing beside her. Betty was the doggie who guessed to ask Kristen Adriana. She only nodded her head affirmatively and sobbed again. That incident had roused her. Some Christina on the memory of the former home and happy her life and let out, long contain her emotions. That same night she came, fell in one shirt, into a small room of caretakers, where on the couch slept on duty, and silently crawled under the blanket to Adriana. It turned out only in the morning, when the nurse woke up a little earlier than the alarm clock and felt a small and warm baby body of Christina under her side. She picked up the sleeping girl and carried her back to bed. And after a common breakfast, her kindergarten teacher pulled Adriana by the arm as usual and led her back to the room with a sofa. Adriana sat down and placed the girl on her lap, realizing that she wanted to say something, and sure enough, Christina opened her mouth, looked at Adriana pitifully, and suddenly made up her mind. Betty was walking with someone else's aunt. I know my mother won't come again. Can you be my mother now? Adriana's painful heart clenched. She pursed her lips to keep from crying and replied, of course, honey, only it will be a secret between you and me. Okay, I can't take you home. I'm your teacher here. Do you understand? Why can't you? The girl was trying to understand. Because Adriana, and did not find at once what to answer the little girl. And it is true that because she is already too old to raise such a baby. Because she has a sick old mother at home and a small salary. Because she'll never be able to cope. She won't be able to give a girl, and then a girl, what she needs so badly. And to take away her hope of adoption, and maybe a happy life, she has no right. Because I have a very small apartment. Adriana finally said, It's okay. The little girl protested heatedly. It's nothing. I'm so small. I do not take up much space, and I have an old mother living with me. Almost crying, Adriana added, So it won't work at all. I'm sorry. You and I are going to live here like family. Okay. All right, the girl nodded. What else was there for her to do? Poor girl. Time passed its course. Christina had grown from a frightened little girl to an awkward teenager with long legs and a perpetual habit of biting her nails. No one ever adopted her while she was a baby. Several times people paid attention to her, but Christina herself would never agree to be adopted. as these children expressed it. Ever since she saw the doggy out the window, she regained her ability to speak, and she was very vocal. And she had a temper, too. It was no longer her, but Brown and the rest of the offenders that were biting off. "Don't you dare touch me harshly," she said. One night, the babysitter on duty, who wanted to take her to the bathroom to wash off the makeup from her eyes. The girls had been pestering her in unknowable ways since she was 12 years old. The simplest eyeshadow, mascara, nail polish, and other things of interest to them, and trying desperately to assert themselves in this way. What a princess she was, the babysitter angrily retorted. "Here, I'll get you." And she reached out her hand to grab the unruly girl by the scruff of the neck. But the girl turned and bit her painfully in the palm of her hand. And from jumping to the side, she stood in a fighting stance, like a cat, ready to attack. Eyes sparkling, hands with painted, sharply sharpened nails put forward. Only there is no hair, or it would stand up on end. "Oh, devil spawn," muttered the babysitter. But she did not want to mess with him anymore. She went and put a Band-Aid on the bite, and promised to complain to the boss. Just try to threaten her, unruly girl. I also have something to remember. You think I don't know where you hide your bottles? Mockingly, she added. The principal will know too. Be quiet. Brown, with rage mixed with amazement, could not find what to say to this insolence, and stood for a moment, opposite, angrily glaring with her eyes. Nasty. Finally waved her hand, turned around and went to her room on duty. When I arrived first thing, went under the upholstery of the couch, where in a secret hole was really hidden bottle. And the bottle is gone. Mournfully, to no one in the head sitter realized that the nasty girl was not bluffing, and stole her stash, had to surrender their positions and conclude a shaky truce. And only to Adriana, her sensitive and secretive mother Christina, was still gentle and affectionate, often the two of them, joined together in a tiny nursery, on duty, talking heart to heart until late at night, drinking tea with homemade cookies that Adriana brought her favorite, and shared their uncomplicated secrets. I was asked by Livingston from the third group to go out last night, quietly persuaded by Christina Adriana. And you? Affectionately stroking the girl by her thick blonde hair. Asked the girl, punched him properly. Smirking, Christina, so that he knows another time whom he offers to date. Otherwise, I do not know what they have in mind. Adriana only sighed. The girls at the boarding school had known everything since they were 11, if not earlier. The specifics of the establishment could not be helped. She tried her best to explain a lot of things to her group in an accessible and ethical way, so that at least they wouldn't try to go to all lengths to get the details they were interested in. There was one girl in the 6th group who got pregnant at the age of 14. My God, what their teacher was looking at. But you can't keep an eye on them all. They're so sneaky. But Christina Adriana was safe. That girl was quick to put a stop to that kind of crawling. One in the face the other. So there is no one else who wants to have a close relationship with her. Christina often asked Adriana about her dead parents. Who were they? What did they do? A kind woman, seeking to help her pupil, extracted from Tursten's personal card all the necessary information. And what was not there, she told herself, as far as she knew and remembered. The whole town had been discussing the murder loudly for months. She also brought old newspapers from the library, with articles about her father and his activities as a businessman. There were also posted pictures of Christina, their parents, and her smiling little girl with her mother and father. When she entered the orphanage, she was no longer smiling. Christina spent a long time looking through the newspapers, reading from cover to cover. All the articles and notes, then withdrew into herself for a few days, became silent and thoughtful, and answered questions inappropriately. And finally digesting the information I had received, Adriana said with grim determination, "When I grow up and finally get out of here, I will find my parents' killers and avenge their deaths." God covered his mouth with his hand. Adriana, don't think you can't even live in the past. You have everything ahead of you, your whole life. Don't break it. Do you think I can live with the knowledge that my parents' murderers live off the money my father stole from them? Christina was indignant. That was the first time she and Adriana had quarreled, so to speak. But after a couple of days, they made up and apologized to each other. And life went on. In the end, Adriana thought the girl had forgotten her fervent words and her vow of vengeance. But time proved her very wrong. The first thing Christina did when she received her papers at age 18 was to go to the cemetery to visit her parents' grave. She sat there for a long time, whispered something to herself, stroked their modest hand photo, and then throwing a bag with her belongings into the 10-meter room that she and her classmate were allocated. From the state, went to the Department of Health, and wrote an application for the issuance of duplicates, certificates of death of her parents, their marriage, and their relatives. 3 weeks later, she was issued everything she requested. It turned out that on her father's side, she had a native aunt and a grandfather who lived in an unknown place. And her paternal grandmother died a long time ago, when her father himself was still a schoolboy on her mother's side. And there are no aunts, no uncles, no grandmother, no grandfather. Christina, I want to suggest to you what Adriana said to Christina. At the next meeting, I have an old acquaintance. She works at our institute in the biology department, now a professor, P. You've always liked biology, haven't you? Do you want me to ask her to meet you? Let her talk to you herself, see what you know. Maybe help you with your admission. Thank you, Adriana. Christina said gratefully. That would be wonderful. So it's a deal. Adriana was happy. That's good. I will call you. And tell me how you and your friend Nancy are settling in. Yes, everything seems fine. Christina grinned. Nancy is a homemaker. She cooks a lot. She made pies yesterday. Can you imagine? She treated all the neighbors. Adriana laughed a little, not knowing how to say it. Suddenly, she reached out her hand and slipped a few bills into Kristen's pocket. This is for your settling in. What is it, Adriana Filipovna? The girl became indignant. That's unnecessary. I'm fine with that. Is your mother sick? My mother died a week ago. Adriana put her head down. And now I'm all alone. Here, please, don't hurt me. You are almost like family to me. She looked at Christine belittlingly, and she suddenly noticed how recently the familiar and sweet features of a kind teacher had changed. What deep wrinkles had grown along the nose, around the lips, under the eyes, and the eyes themselves. How do they look now? Pathetically sad, even wistful. Well, she hugged Adriana. Thank you so much for everything. Christina, that girl is very sad. Well, you come see me. Okay, I'll write you the address. Come on in, don't be shy. The second trip to the DOI was not especially successful. First, Christina was not in office hours, and secondly, the woman at the window said that such requests are very long and not always reliable. It often happens that when you change your place of residence, you don't put a new address on the card, and then it takes a long time for the information to reach the system. Come on Tuesday morning, we will make inquiries. But I would not count on any result if I were you. And a lot of time has passed since then. Christina was a little disappointed, but then she thought for a while and came to the conclusion that she shouldn't be discouraged. No one had promised her that everything would be easy. She would have to make her own way in this life. After all, she had no one else but Adriana. Kristen felt warm and happy at the thought of the old woman, as if a small hot flame was lit. Smiling, she involuntarily shook her head and went to the Central City Library to carry out the second part of her grand plan. Hi, can I please have a copy of the July-September 1998 issue of the city newspaper? What? No, I don't have a card. Oh, here's my passport. Registering at the library as a reader, Christina received a pile of press for the period she needed and delved deeper into her research, completely oblivious to the world around her. That's not it. That's not it. Completely irrelevant. Suddenly she cried out, quite loudly, making several readers wince. But here she spoke in a whisper. Let's see William Thompson, a prominent businessman, the main competitor of the businessman recently killed in an improvised explosive device explosion, was previously seen in connections with informal gangster groups. He was the prime suspect in the murder of Kristen's father and his wife. Guilty as charged. The criminal case is suspended for lack of evidence. Christina read it. So that's it, she muttered. Well, hang in there now, William, and tomorrow or the day after. And for another couple of days, she went to the library again and again to read old newspapers. At the same time, social networks and other electronic resources here had internet access for readers. She didn't have her own computer or smartphone yet. There was an old landline phone in the communal apartment. Until now, to think that was her only connection to the outside world. But Christina didn't have time. She was just beginning her independent life and was determined to get back her father's fortune and avenge her parents' death. After researching all the information available to her, she learned the following. After the criminal case was closed, William, the alleged murderer of her relatives, winded up all business and left town with his wife for Boston. And ran away then, Christina summarized. But nothing escapes me anyway. She did some more research on the internet. Googled. The man was quite famous, and it turned out that in Boston, Thompson did not sit idly by, and soon he was doing something similar to what he had done in his hometown. He got into the local government structure, first as a municipal deputy, then as a nominee of a political movement, and now he was back in a good position, which helped him in his business. Surely it was all on Daddy's money. Christina lamented to herself. She was faced with the difficult task of finding an opportunity and getting close to this very thing. Thompson, if you can get into his confidence, get to know him. And then, as a maximum program to rob him of his money and prove his guilt in the death of his parents. Christina was not stupid, and she was well aware that she was now an orphanage graduate. There was almost no chance to draw the attention of law enforcement agencies to her problem, to a long-standing, long-delayed criminal case in the archives. No, she would be smarter than that and not act openly. Here she would have to be more cunning and try to defeat her opponent with his own weapon. She did not know how to do this yet, but she hoped very much to find a way in the near future. And if it took years, let her be young and willing to sacrifice her time to achieve her goal. A few days later, Adriana called her and told her that she had made an appointment with her friend, the professor. Christina wanted to tell her over the phone that she didn't have to, and that she had completely different plans. But she changed her mind and said she would go to her house. There they could have a quiet talk. It was agreed that this visit would take place on Friday night. This was the first time Christina had been in Adriana's cramped two-room apartment. She, in general, like all internet children, had not been in a real apartment of an ordinary person who lives in her own home. She had long ago forgotten her secure, happy childhood. And now with interest, looking around, the small kitchen was packed with furniture, so that she only had to walk sideways between the table and the closet. It seemed to her a model of domesticity. How nice is this place? Christina, cautiously, sat down on a rickety old stool and smelled the mossy rows of violets sitting in pots on the windowsill. How pretty are they? Thank you, Adriana smiled at her. Let's have some tea. Here's some candy for me. It's so empty in here now. Now to business. Jenna Green will be waiting for you Wednesday night in her department. She's taking a class there. And then she'll talk to you. Adriana, Christina switched. I don't know how to say it. The thing is, I've decided to go to Boston. Marveled Adriana, as in Boston. Why? Turns out I had relatives there who were embarrassed about having to lie like that, said Christina, my father's cousin. Ah, that's what. Adriana took off her glasses and wiped them with a napkin, looking distractedly at Christina with a trusting underblind gaze. Do you think she'll accept you? I don't know. Christina shrugged. Perhaps, and if she doesn't, I'll try to get a foothold there. Maybe I'll get a job, but where will you stay if you're not sure if your aunt will take you in? At least for the first time. Adriana didn't give up. I'm terribly worried about my favorite foster child. I do not know, Christina answered again. And you yourself begin to doubt the feasibility of your grand plan. Indeed, where will she go from the station? And she has not a penny of money. A tiny government allowance is unlikely to help her find any housing. You know what strongly, said Adriana, guessing that the girl just succumbed to impulsive impulses. So go to the meeting on Wednesday with Jenna Green, professor of applied biology. Remember, talk to her. She will assess your knowledge. Perhaps she will tell you how you can get into St. Petersburg College. Otherwise, it will be uncomfortable. I asked her to take you, and you're not coming. Yes, okay, agreed Christina. and gratefully hugged her patroness. "Well, I'll be going now. Goodbye, goodbye, daughter," said Adriana affectionately, and slammed the door behind the girl. She never had any children of her own and never married. The old mother to her beloved Violet, that was it. The living beings that belonged to her, quite a few. The hearts that had lived in this world. Adriana said nothing to Christina yet, but she had already decided that she would leave her apartment to her, and even made a will at the notary. The institute struck Xenia with its scale disproportionately huge, as it seemed to her, numerous passages with lots of doors and doors. Then she realized that in the evening there are almost no people here, and in the daytime there probably is no place to fall down. And she was not far from the truth. With difficulty I found the right classroom, and sat down to wait until the end of the retake. A few students, waiting their turn, were leaning back and forth along the corridor, running to smoke in the toilets, or sitting with their textbooks, apparently intent on the last moment to absorb the material not studied. One of the textbooks was lying on the chairs, lined up in front of the classroom door, with nothing to do. Christina picked it up and began leafing through it. She was early, and by all appearances, she was going to be here for a long time. It turned out to be a textbook on human anatomy, a university course. The girl read one paragraph and then another. The reading fascinated her so much that she had almost forgotten. What was the purpose of being here? The material was laid out far more broadly than in a school textbook. And soon Christina came across a chapter on the physiology of pregnancy. Here she came across a term she had never heard before and had no idea it even existed. Surrogacy. It turned out that it was possible to bear and give birth to a child whose biological material belonged entirely to other people. That is, the primary fertilization of an egg is done in a test tube, roughly speaking. And then the viable embryo is inserted into the uterus of a woman who is carrying someone else's child. This fact struck Christina so hard that she put the textbook aside. And she thought deeply, why is this necessary at all? She took the book again and found out that the procedure is conducted at the request of a childless woman who is unable to conceive and bear a child. Christina, who decided for herself long ago that she didn't need any children. Too much responsibility, and it's not in her life plans. Fiddling with babies. She didn't have time for that. Now she began to wonder, does anyone really want to have a baby that badly? That people agree to such complicated procedures? Well, let's say about a woman who agrees to be a surrogate mother. What is that in her navit? She didn't know the answer to that question, couldn't think of anything, and decided, as usual, to use the library internet the other day. Here and there the students dispersed. Someone took the abandoned textbook, and Christina quietly slipped into the classroom and suddenly came face to face with an older, stern-looking woman who was packing books and notebooks into her bag. "Good evening, I'm from Adriana." "My name is Christina," she told the teacher, and tiredly replied the other and lost her temper. "Why are you so late?" "I was waiting until your test was over," Christina replied. "You should have come in. While they were writing, we would have talked to you." "A little annoyed," said the woman. "That's all right. I'll come back another time." She turned around. It was Christina to leave, but Jenna stopped her. Wait, what a hustler you are." "Yeah," the girl turned around. "Let's go to the cafe on the first floor, there until 9. It's open to employees. At least I'll drink coffee because my head is already cast iron from the day." After drinking coffee, the woman really revived and now looked favorably on Christina. "So you are my Adriana's favorite. Tell me about it." "There's not much to tell," Christina shrugged. "Adriana insisted that I come to you. I've always liked biology. That's all. I've been thinking about where to go, and now I want to go to Boston." Jenna raised her eyebrows at once. "So to Boston, too?" "Yes," Christina nodded. "I have distant relatives there." "So what do you like about biology?" "What section? What area?" Slightly mockingly asked the professor. Well, Christina hesitated. "I didn't really have any priorities until tonight. Until I read a section in someone's textbook on the physiology of pregnant women." That's how surprised Jenna was again. "And what are you so interested in?" "Surrogacy." With sparkling eyes, the girl answered. "It is so exciting. I agree, Jenna nodded. Well, I have one contact. A fellow student works in the Department of Medical Pathology at Boston University. He has written a lot of research papers on the subject. I'll write him. Maybe he'll hire you as a lab tech, but you'd have to take an internal exam on a common basis. They have their own competition. What did you take, apart from the compulsory ones? Just chemistry and biology, Christina smiled. 80 and 82 test scores, respectively. Did Jenna raise her glasses and look at her companion with renewed attention? That's an excellent result. In that case, you can qualify for the budget. I have no other option anyway. Again, she smiled slightly ironically. Christina, thank you for your help. I'll be sure to inform you and give Adriana the contacts. Nodded her Jenna goodbye, and so it turned out that Christina ended up in Boston. Right from the train station, she went to the man she was recommended by Jenna, and he really welcomed her and listened to her. Where are you staying? He asked the girl. At the end of a long conversation, which included a small examination of the subject matter and a further tour of the laboratory where Christina was to work. Nowhere yet, said Christina. I came straight to you. You see, the professor, whose name was Sebastian Paul, took off his glasses and put them next to him on the table. Without big thick lenses, his eyes immediately became large and fluffy long eyelashes and childishly naive. It became obvious that this not yet old man is terribly intelligent and decent. You see, Christina, he repeated again, obviously choosing his words carefully. I hope you won't think me strange, but Jenna has told me a little about you, so I'm aware of your predicament. Christina was silent, looking at him carefully and calmly, not understanding what he was getting at. So Sebastian Paul repeated for the umpteenth time, trying to get to the point. I have a summer house not far from the city. It's very convenient to get there by train. The station is very close. Not long ago a man, a good acquaintance of mine, lived there. Yes, he looked after the house a little bit. You see, I'm a very busy man and I'm lonely. My parents are dead. Christina's interlocutor broke into a sweat at the suggested mental effort. So, would you not agree to do it for free? Certainly. He held up his index finger and shook it in the air, as if asserting his own words. Would you be willing to stay in this cottage for a while? It's very comfortable. It has all the comforts of home. I am sure you would like it. He looked at her so belittlingly, as if it were not Christina who was an utter orphan with nowhere to go, but he himself who had asked her for this favor. The girl burst into an unnecessary and at the wrong time laughter. It was very comical, this grown-up and important man asking her to stay in his dacha as an incredibly important favor. Christina could hardly suppress this foolish impulse of hers and left only a polite smile on her face. Oh, I would be very grateful for this opportunity. You would? The professor was delighted. Of course, it's quite a long drive. It will take about an hour to get to the laboratory, but it's very beautiful and not at all scary. Security barrier in the village. Everything as it should be. Please don't be afraid, aren't you? No, assured him Christina. Still Reddy laughed. Fine. The professor put on his glasses and turned back into an important and not criminal big man. Please, spend some time before tonight, and it will be about 8 o'clock. You and I will take my car to the place. I'll show you around. I'm very glad that everything worked out so well. You can have lunch now in the university cafeteria, and I ordered you to be let through, and tomorrow your pass will be ready, and you will be free to move around all the internal territory. You can go to work the day after tomorrow or the day after that. How to settle it is not urgent. Finally, Christina managed to slip out of the office where this conversation took place, and she literally folded in half with a fit of laughter that still overtook her. To think through such a human chain of acquaintances had found a place for her in this world. She felt deep gratitude to both Adriana and Jenna Green, and to that quirky male professor under whose guidance she was soon to work, and in whose house she was now to live for the first week in her new first-ever job. All she did was wash and scrub. Lab utensils, endless flasks, test tubes. We had to soak in disinfectant solutions, a different one for each species, then stacked in rows and marked with special markers, and then washed with the usual general detergent. Dried in a large heat-resistant cabinet, and disinfected and dried again at the end. It was a lot of work, but Christina even liked this monotonous work. She liked the very atmosphere of the laboratory, where intelligent people worked as a friendly team, solving important problems. Moving forward, the science here put experiments, described this process, and the results filled many special journals, both ordinary and electronic, and sent somewhere archives or data. Several large laboratory departments occupied an entire wing of the building. There was also a university in this building, the forge for the future of science. That's where Christina hoped to enroll in the chemistry and biology department next fall. In the meantime, she diligently absorbed all the subtleties of the new independent life. Salary in the laboratory, of course, was not good, but she did not need much. She did not pay a cent for her luxurious accommodation, and utilities were also all paid for by the owner, part-time Christina boss. Not only that, he also paid her to look after the house. However, the girl flatly refused to take the money. But then Sebastian Paul began to transfer it to her card. Christina, ashamed to return the money, was not comfortable, but also did not use it. Let them be for a rainy day, so she reasoned. She ate very little. She ate lunch in the university cafeteria on the cheap. In the lab could always get free coffee and tea. And besides, the staff was constantly bringing something, and the common fridge was full of supplies. Christina wasn't falling behind either. In order not to seem like a bread maker, with time she mastered some culinary skills and began to bake homemade pastries. She brought them to work. She treated everyone to them. At Sebastian's house, she occupied the smallest guest room, as the owner had told her. She used, of course, the kitchen and the downstairs bathroom and the washing machine and the utility room, but she cleaned. But she cleaned everything once a week, like clockwork. She enjoyed bringing perfect cleanliness to this large and empty house, and liked the smell and sight of well-tidied rooms. She liked the fact that she could do some good for her good employer. She had to get up early, but it was neither a hardship nor a novelty. The train station was really close to the village. It was about a 15-minute walk. The sounds of passing trains were clearly audible, especially at night. Christina liked that too. She worked officially until 6 p.m., but sometimes she stayed longer if she needed to in the evenings. And on weekends, she could walk around Boston as much as she wanted. She loved it. She liked everything here. But not for a moment, not even for a second, did she forget her main purpose for which she had, in fact, come here. In the few months she had been here, she had studied the personality and activities of her enemy, inside and out, press, talk, internet, which she now had available. She bought herself the simplest used smartphone. Everything was at her service. But how would she get to William? She still had no idea. The opportunity presented itself quite unexpectedly, and not at all the way she had imagined the laboratory, in which she now worked on an equal footing with others. Christina was involved, among other things, in the treatment of complex genetic diseases leading to infertility. The group of scientists, led by Sebastian Paul, was the flagship, used in their research the most advanced methods, and enjoyed well-deserved prestige in scientific circles. That is why a married couple, unsuccessfully trying to have a child for many years, turned to them. All their attempts suffered invariable failures. Numerous pregnancies ended in miscarriages. And now, when they were both in their 40s, their hope to have a baby naturally has dried up. Today we have important people coming, said Wendy Ingram, the head of the department where Christina worked at City Hall. Sebastian Paul warned us not to speak out of turn. It's like doctor-patient confidentiality. Right. We're not even gonna look. Not even a glimpse of the employee's supervisor. Well, that's good, she smiled. Now get to work. Christina, sensibly silent. She generally often kept silent, but the work is always done well and on time. So she rightly earned a reputation in the laboratory as neat and efficient and able to keep her mouth shut. In the middle of that day, about an hour after lunch, Wendy Ingram summoned the girl to her office. Christina, have a seat. Sebastian Paul asked me to speak to you. I am listening. Christina answered calmly. Our laboratory is currently assigned a new task. You remember, of course, one of the important areas of our research related to the viability of human eggs. Yes, nodded the girl. So, Wendy continued. Now we have a rare opportunity to continue experiments with the biomaterial of a particular person. Is that possible? Christina raised her eyebrows slightly, surprised by the turn of events. Let's say in some cases, yes. The boss looked at her young employee, but everything that happens within these walls must stay here. You understand me, Christina? I certainly do. The girl responded. Very well. Wendy Ingram, satisfied with the course of the conversation, lost her hands. In that case, I officially inform you that you, Christina Dmitrievna, from this day on, are appointed Senior Laboratory Assistant in the department to Sebastian Paul, to begin tomorrow. Now go to the Personnel Department. Will you need to sign the documents? I will. Christina got up and left. She was not particularly surprised by her new assignment, since she was well aware that she was the most suitable person for it. Alone and totally dependent on the lab management. Where could she find a more ideal person for this top-secret research? But she had no idea what lay ahead of her and what new challenges fate would bring. 9:00 a.m. Bright, surprisingly bright for a winter Boston sun. New office, new post. Christina sits at her new desk and arranges her work supplies, creating her own order. Christina, this was handed to you. The receptionist places a simple cardboard folder on her desk. Sebastian Paul says to read it. Good, Christina nods. Thank you. Calmly opening the folder, she read the introduction about the medical procedures to be performed as part of the scientific study, and turning the page, she saw the card of the patient whose biological material is being submitted for this study. Thompson Kelly. Read Christina, and with increasing amazement and interest, she continued, I am 46 years old. 9 pregnancies all ended spontaneously with an abortion in the first trimester, 6 in vitro fertilization attempts under hospital conditions. Clinical pregnancies were not diagnosed. Not a single case of pathology of the patient's reproductive system. Christina closed the folder and thought. Her thoughts bounced around feverishly and in complete disarray. She was in a state of extreme mental agitation and could think of nothing else but the chance that fate itself presented to her. Christina had no doubt that this woman was who she thought she was. Her spouse's name and title were both listed under marital status. In addition, on the next section, he, William Thompson, 48, was listed as a patient participating in a research and scientific experiment. A patient providing his biological material. And she, Christina, the daughter of the parents who suffered at his hands, sits here at this table, has access to all the classified information and will soon be directly involved in the whole process. What is this, if not a gift of fate, the opportunity to settle accounts with his enemies? But only how? How exactly need to think of something and quickly? Suddenly the girl realized the most important thing. But William could easily recognize her. Not by her appearance, of course, but by her last name. It is unlikely that he had already completely forgotten about his crime and the man he had ordered to destroy with his wife. What was to be done? What was to be done? Christina was thinking frantically, and she found no better option than to change her name. But it was impossible to do it urgently. And then she had to explain this spontaneous decision to her superiors. However, she had to find out everything first, heartily. At the end of the day, she approached Sebastian. May I join you? And Christina? He smiled. Please, come in. What is the question? I wanted to know the steps of our future work in the experiment. Yes, I am listening. He put his hands on the table and looked at her intently. How long before we get to work directly with the patients? Well, how can I tell you? Sebastian Paul, leaning back in his chair. Everything will depend on the progress of the primary research. Perhaps, even most likely, it will take several months. Good, nodded the girl. And if I understand correctly, the ultimate goal of our patients is a new cycle of echo attempts. In principle, yes, the professor nodded. Only already using viable eggs modified in the course of our experiments. But I confess, based on my medical history, I don't think this option is acceptable. Why not? You see, the patient's body is hardly able to withstand the strain of pregnancy. I mean, you probably already read the chart. You've seen how many chronic diseases there are, right? Yes, Christina said. But then what's the way out? Surrogacy is just that. The professor smiled. I see you don't waste any time. That's very commendable. Thank you for the clarification. Christina stood up. That's exactly what I needed to understand the essence of our work. One more thing. Sebastian Paul, I think I should let you know about my impending change of name. We will soon have the pleasure of congratulating you. The professor raised his eyebrows. No, Christina smiled. I guess he was referring to marriage. My marital status will not change. Only I want to change my last name, because the current one reminds me too much of the tragedy that took place in my family. Oh, of course, I understand. The professor frowned slightly. Please accept my sincere apologies. That reminds you it's all right. Time heals. Christina tilted her head slightly, saying goodbye, and left the office. Came to her room, made a strong espresso from the coffee machine, and thought again. So she should have enough time to change her last name. Now she had to devise some plan to get close to the Thompson family, to gain their trust, so that one day, when she was able to completely confuse the enemy with her network of cunning intrigue, look him in the eye before she destroys him completely and tells him whose daughter she is. That is when she will finally avenge her parents' deaths. William Thompson. The big official was actually miserable financially. He had everything he could wish for. He had social status too, of course, but he had no normal, real family in his life. He had not loved his wife for a long time, and in the past few years he had felt a real disgust for her, an endless failure to have a child. Sloppy and restless, constantly preoccupied with how to maintain her hopelessly seen femininity. As a young woman, Kelly was a gorgeous ex-model, and William was immensely proud of his wife. When they were out in public, all the men would shake envious glances at her, and it flattered his ego greatly. At first he and she did not even think about having a child. They wanted first to achieve a position in society, to stand firmly on their own feet. And then it turned out that it was too late and nothing works. We started to go to doctors to have tests. I had to endure a lot of not very pleasant procedures. In the course of all this medical torture, William inadvertently learned about the old abortions of his wife, which she had done before he met him, and became absolutely angry, began to blame her for everything, and now could not even see her quietly cut off in the neck. Desperately trying to make up for lost time over and over again, he was compelled. He, too, was being subjected to humiliating examinations and biological sampling. Of course, he had all the mistresses he wanted. William himself was still looking pretty good. He played regular sports, tennis and soccer for the City Hall team. And he was an enviable object of women's attention. But he desperately wanted more than just one-night stands. He wanted a normal family, where he would want to return after a day of work with children. His own children, not adopted bastards of who knows what kind. Kelly repeatedly offered and begged him almost on his knees to take a child from the orphanage and raise it as his own. Don't even think about it. He categorically answered her, "Never in my life. I will not raise someone else's offspring. Who knows what he will grow up to be? Who were his parents? What kind of heredity did he have? I want my own child, period." "But what if we never get one of our own?" desperately asked Kelly. "Then I'll find someone else to be a mother to my children." Her husband yelled in anger at her, a normal, healthy woman who had not had an abortion when she was young. Oh, that's it. Kelly was mortally offended. So now it's all my fault. Yes, who else could it be? Certainly not me. If I were you, I'd think long and hard before I looked for someone else. Kelly showed up. What do you mean? William was indignant. You what? Threatening me or whatever you want to call me. Only if I find out something like that. You'll be aware of that. The same day, the investigation will have my statement describing all your shady dealings. It's God who sees everything, who doesn't give you children because you're a monster. You orphaned someone else's little girl and killed her parents. I swung at you. He swung William in his heart, but never followed through with his threats, because he knew that his wife was capable of what she was talking about. In addition, a huge amount of his property was registered in her name, houses, apartments, offshore accounts, several companies. They were so tightly bound that only death could break that bond. And more, often William had such thoughts. How good it would be to get rid of her, that woman he hated. Then he would be free again, would have a new woman, young, healthy, who would give him the same healthy children. But apparently Kelly sensed his terrible thoughts and was careful to keep herself safe. They hardly lived together anymore. But she didn't give him a divorce either, although he had offered her that easy option more than once. "No, you've got it all figured out," she said. With a wicked grin, "You can't get rid of me that easily. Don't think about it. And even a statement's already been written, mind you. And if anything happens, my lawyer will make it go away. You can be sure, with his own money, she hired a guard, and to get close to her, not to be able to." Publicity was very problematic, and he didn't need the media hype, and William was afraid of Kelly's threats, knowing full well that she could carry them out. It turned out that even from the afterlife, she would not let him live in peace, and all the time these intrusive lectures. He was sick and tired of her stupid religion. God damn it. As if the usual neurosis wasn't enough. Anyway, she was making William's life miserable. And probably for the first time, he couldn't make up his mind about anything. And yet, in this hopeless fog, a ray of hope suddenly flashed. One ordinary day she called him, and he grimaced as he picked up the phone. "Hello, it's me." Abruptly she said without any preamble. "I need to see you." "What for?" "To talk about the possibility of us breaking up. I think I've found a way that works for both of us." Really, William's interested. "But look, if this is another one of your antics." "No," replied Kelly calmly. "No tricks. It's honest. Tonight at my place we can't discuss such things in public places." They arranged a time to meet, and in the evening he arrived at her apartment. His wife was in a surprisingly good mood, carefully dressed, and in general she looked pretty good. "Come in and sit down." She invited him in, smiling. "What would you like to drink?" William said grudgingly. "I am in a hurry." But of course she nodded understandingly. "I'll have a drink then, if you don't mind." She knocked back a flute of something and continued, "Don't worry. I've really come to the conclusion that you and I are better off apart." Hallelujah! A mock section of hands up, William. "And what gave you such a startlingly clever idea?" "Not to be sarcastic," pronounced Kelly. "I don't care about your jokes. Listen, you'd better pay attention. I agree to divorce you, but only after you do me one last favor." "I'm all ears," said William, throwing his leg over his head and splashing himself with a large decanter of jolly liquid. "I intend to try to have a baby one last time," Kelly said calmly. "And I need your biomaterial fresh," she clarified, anticipating his objection that he had already provided her with enough of his material, which was stored frozen. "The thing is," Kelly continued, "I was recommended by a research institute here in Boston that does experimental research in this field. In short, they affect the eggs with something, and they become active. But let's say William agreed. And what if it doesn't work this time either? Are you going to tell me I owe you something?" "No," Kelly shook her head. "If it doesn't work out, we're getting a divorce anyway." "Okay, and if it works out?" asked William a new question. "Then I'll finally have a child, which you promised not to claim." That's how William smirked. "And then why do I need all this parsley to get rid of me?" Kelly said calmly. "Can you start a new family? You don't have a problem with that, do you? But you can use any donor material, can't you?" William was surprised. "Why do you need me?" "You know what I mean." Kelly sighed. "You don't want to raise someone else's child, do you? You said it yourself 100 times, didn't you? And I don't want to take any chances either. Who knows what kind of heredity these donors have? At least I know everything about you." She laughed ironically. "Yes," William shook his head. "There's something about it you know. I'll think about it. But you know you'll have to sign the papers, don't you? I want a guarantee." "Of course you do," nodded Kelly. "So do I. That's why I consult with my lawyers. And I've already prepared everything from my side. Here you are." She handed him a folder. "What is it?" William asked. "Take your time flipping through the documents, the draft agreement between you and me about everything we've just discussed. It's about the divorce and raising a child. In case it works out, Show it to your lawyers. Okay. William stood up and took the folder. Before communication in a month and a half, Christina received new documents. She took her mother's maiden name and was now O'Neill. Sorry, Daddy, she said with a picture of her father. It won't be long, I promise. I hope I can get some justice soon. And then I'll get our last name back. In the lab. Meanwhile, research and testing and experimentation were in full swing. Christina had already seen Kelly Thompson several times, coming in for procedures, but never once had her husband asked. She did not ask Sebastian anything, considering it unnecessary, and rightly reasoned that he would soon show up too. She was patient and kept repeating to herself that it would have been far worse if their first meeting had taken place before the change of her surname. The calculation proved correct, and one morning, entering the treatment room, she found a middle-aged man elegantly dressed, who stood in a kind of brooding in front of the door of the cubicle for the delivery of white material. Well, finally, he exclaimed, turning to her. Did you bring it? Come on, hurry up. Brought what? Christina was astonished. She recognized him instantly. Blood clung to her face, and at the same time she realized that he meant the plastic container. Clearly some unfortunate mistake had crept in here. Gathering all her courage, the girl smiled. The employee with the containers will be right with you. And I just came to pick up some forms. Pity, smiled William. I wouldn't have minded the presence of such a pretty girl. And he suddenly winked at her with a grin. Christina felt she was ready to jump on him right now, like a ravenous panther, and tear him to shreds. But instead, she just smiled back politely, carefully pretending not to take the hint. She turned, took the forms, and left the office, finding herself in the corridor, leaning her back against the cold painted wall, and covering her face with her palm, forcing herself to steady her breathing. Christina, what are you? A passing colleague carrying that ill-fated container? I don't know. Christina raised her head. Something in her eyes darkened suddenly. I didn't sleep well tonight. The pressure is very low, nodded a colleague. Go have a coffee. Christina passed out of the truth and really followed the good advice. Her mind cleared a little, and she began to scold herself as best she could for such foolish behavior. She should have played along, she thought. And what am I, a fool? When would I get the chance now? She fidgeted. She promptly made another cup of espresso and rushed to the treatment room. Sat down by the office, clutching the hot cup, not even noticing how it burned her fingers, and began to wait. As luck would have it, the wait wasn't long and the coffee didn't get cold. After a minute, the door creaked open and let William out. Excuse me. Christina smiled at him dazzlingly. I came to make it up to you and brought you some coffee. Thank you. He was pleasantly surprised. But what was your fault? I should have been more polite, Christina answered, feigning remorse. You will forgive me. I will think it over. He smiled merrily. Say if you agree to have dinner with me tonight. And tonight Christina pretended to go over her schedule in her mind. Though there was nothing more important to her than this meeting. I guess so. Oh, that's fine. Then I'll pick you up at 7 o'clock, William said. Will you tell me where? I'll be here at work, Christina smiled. I live far out of town, so I can't go back and forth. I see, he nodded. Well, I'll see you tonight then. He walked down the corridor, now and then looking back at the strange and attractive girl who smiled at him embarrassingly so nice blush. Just the kind of girl I need, thought William. Simple and sweet and direct and not spoiled. To be sure of his paternity. Their first date went exactly as Christina imagined, in an expensive restaurant, on a table with a bouquet of lively white roses. Muffled, pleasant music played. He tells her something he thinks is funny and entertaining, and she sits smiling. Sometimes she answers him inappropriately. She drinks small sips of white wine and strains all her inner resources not to jump up and smash this heavy vase with delicate roses against his head. But every trial comes to an end. It ends, and that awful date, and Christina, accompanied by her enemy, went outside, where a piercing wind was blowing. The weather today, however, William smiled, lifting the collar of his expensive woolen coat. Where can I drop you? To the train, Christina said. I have a long way to go and you have farther to go. It is not worth the trouble. What kind of trouble is that? William laughed. The driver will take you. It is his job. His companion didn't need to be persistent. Just as far as the train. I'll take it from here. My parents are very strict, you understand? Oh, then, of course. William looked at the girl appraisingly. Is she really as innocent as she seems? That would be good luck. Somehow Christina herself did not realize how she had managed to capture his attention. She, of course, did not know about his marital discord, but soon he himself, fueled by drink and her exciting company, told her about his problems. The girl took the information in stride and decided it would all come in handy for her. And I told him how I understand you. It's terribly unfair when feelings go away, and a person is forced to drag and pull everything out. And did your relationship cool down? Exactly like that? William exclaimed. You are very right to say that. Although Christina still did not allow him anything but a gentle handshake, and planned not to allow him for a very long time to maintain the image that she herself has created. At the lab, though, things were not going well with Kelly's patient. After several times they managed to get viable eggs and even fertilize them. But the embryos still didn't take root in the woman's body. What Sebastian Paul finally said, all we have to do is find a suitable surrogate mother. Kelly slumped her shoulders sorrowfully and cried. You don't have to. Please don't. The professor couldn't stand any tears of sentimentality. Christina, may I see you? He called from the next room to his assistant. Please, Christina, explain to our patient all the subtleties and methods of surrogacy. And very pleased that he managed to avoid further heartbreaking conversation with the nervous lady and hurriedly left. Here you go. Christina gave the crying woman a clean washcloth and waited until she calmed down. She felt a little pity for this old lady, but she did not for a moment forget that she was the wife of her sworn enemy. Now I will explain everything to you. The girl turned on the big screen and put the right slides on the projector. Look, your embryo will develop in another woman's body, but it will remain genetically yours. It will be like if an egg was hatched, not a chicken, and it matured in an incubator, roughly speaking. Do you understand me? Yes, nodded Kelly, I know. But I'd still like to do it myself. But you have nothing to lose. Reassured her Christina. No problems with the living part of the birth. All this will be taken care of by another woman who will just be an incubator. And the genetic material will be yours and your husband's. And the baby that will be born will also be yours 100%. He will not take anything from the surrogate mother's organism, except for the nutrition necessary for growth and development. Unfortunately, as of today, science has no incubator able to ensure the growth of embryos to full development. So all you have to do is find the right surrogate mother. Okay, yes, nodded Kelly, wiping away her tears. You explain everything so perfectly. What is your name? Christina. The girl smiled. At your service, Christina. Kelly looked at her intently. And you, will you tell me? Finally, she made up her mind and asked directly, would you like to be a surrogate mother for our child? I marveled at the girl who had never thought of such a scenario in the first place. Well, yes, Kelly nodded calmly, and her eyes lit up with a feverish flame. You will get the kind of fee that will allow you to provide for both yourself and your family for the rest of your life. But Christina did not even immediately find what to answer. But I did not think. And you think hard. Kelly stood up and came closer. I promise you won't regret it if you do. But where am I going to find a surrogate right now? I mean, think about it. And then I read how often it ends up that these surrogates don't give their babies back to their birth parents. I'm not going to take that risk at all. And you're a smart girl and you understand everything so well. You're certainly not going to take a child away from us, really, who genetically has nothing to do with you. Christina, still in shock, could only nod. Kelly took the gesture as agreement and exclaimed happily, That's good. I knew you could be trusted. Our lawyers will prepare all the necessary papers. I'm so anxious for this to be over quickly. I assure you, my dear, you won't regret your decision. You never will, she smiled, and cheerfully stroked the shocked girl on the shoulder and left the office. And Christina was left literally open-mouthed by this turn of events. No way, my dear, Sebastian Paul, to whom she briefly blushed and stammered, recounted what had happened half an hour after the departure of the patient. He laughed heartily. It is simply impossible, I assure you. For one thing, you're not the right age. By law, a surrogate mother must be at least 20 years old. Second, she must have at least one healthy child of her own. There you go. And the delusional fantasies of our overly impressionable patient shouldn't bother you. But calm down, he added, seeing Christina nervously tearing up a paper napkin. We've already achieved impressive results from her eggs. And whether or not those embryos take root is not that important to us. We now have material for many years to come. You can write hundreds of articles, publish a report on experiments, and your contribution will undoubtedly be highly appreciated by the admissions committee. I myself on the motion, and for you, my dear. Thank you. Barely squeezed out Christina, who no longer knew what to think. That same evening, she told William about the proposal his wife had made. Oh, you did. He laughed, and she was attracted to him. Apparently so. Christina exhaled, and in a gulp she drank a whole glass of wine, which had never happened to her before. Forget it, William said nonchalantly. That feisty woman doesn't know what she's talking about. But the feisty woman had no intention of backing down. When she met her husband, she categorically demanded that Christina O'Neill be the surrogate mother for their child. Why would you do that? Shouted out of rage William. There are plenty of other women around, and anyone will give birth with just a finger. Remember, Christina suits me for several reasons. Calmly, Kelly answered him and smiled a wickedly triumphant smile, looking him straight in the eye. First of all, she's your new crush, isn't she? Oh my God, rolled his eyes. William, how did you know? You're not the only one with eyes and ears everywhere, triumphantly said Kelly. And secondly, she understands the process very well. She explained it to me herself. Don't you think she could refuse it? William shot up. Why would she refuse? His wife asked. Is it because she loves you? She laughed ironically. She is only with you for the money. Do you imagine that such a diminutive man could attract the attention of such a young lady? Yes, without your position and money, you're nothing. A zero without a stick. Kelly's gone, you know? He rose menacingly from his chair, but the woman preceded him with a warning, raising her hand with her cell phone. One press and my guards will be here instantly. Do you need extra witnesses? No, then calm down and hear me out to the end. William sighed heavily and sat back down. So Kelly rubbed her temples thoughtfully. I want this girl to carry our baby. I don't know if you slept with her already or not, and I don't care about that. Before the procedure, the doctor will still check to see if she's already pregnant. I'd advise you to take it slow and easy. Otherwise, I'm out of the game. And don't forget your statement, she said threateningly. She paused in her sleep again, glaring at her angrily. Calm down, Kelly grinned. Are you going to get it too? First of all, it could very well be a multiple pregnancy. We'll split the babies up fair and square, and then we'll all go our separate ways. And if only one child is born, it's mine. Will she give you another? Laughed bitterly, woman. All right, you keep forgetting that we are talking about a living person. William is angry. And if she refuses, is it your job to convince her? Solemnly said Kelly. That would be my guarantee. The guarantee that she will not take my child. Because if it were any other woman, not even you, with all your money, could stop it, you know? And I certainly can't stop it. But this is different. Not only is my baby at stake, but your freedom too. So it's either that or nothing. This conversation is over. William was ready to kill her, but instead all he had to do was clench his teeth and nod his head in agreement. Hell, he'd convince anyone and anything to get rid of his wife's bed once and for all. Now, however, there was a serious conversation to be had with Christina. William thought long and hard about how to approach the matter cautiously and gently, how to persuade her to agree. But when they finally met to talk, this strange and mysterious girl once again surprised him. William, I wanted to tell you. She began kind of hesitantly. Has your wife offered me to be a surrogate for your baby? Yes, I know, he nodded, certain that an ugly scene like the one he was so familiar with at the mercy of Kelly was about to begin. And while he was agonizing over the words, Christina continued, "So I've decided that I will. It's true." He was dumbfounded and stared at her, not believing what he was hearing, and only managed to squeeze out quite the opposite of what he wanted to say. "Why?" "To free you from this hateful marriage that is keeping us from being together," Christina told him softly. My little girl had taken William by surprise. He didn't think she felt that way about him. So Kelly had been completely wrong when she had said that Christina wanted from him only money from her. His self-esteem skyrocketed, and now he was willing to do anything for this sweet girl. "Oh my goodness. You have no idea how much you're going to help me with this. But there are some complications." Christina frowned slightly. "And you will have to help me." Tell me," he looked at her adoringly. "I'll need a new passport with a date of birth 2 years older and a birth certificate for my supposedly first child. The law is such that it prescribes these conditions for a potential surrogate." "Will do," rejoiced William, who had expected otherwise, that the girl would now start making conditions for herself, asking for money, property, and things like that. But this saint, it seemed to him, wanted only to help. "You won't treat me worse after all that's happened to Hope, will you?" she asked him. "God be with you, of course not." He took her in his arms and kissed her tenderly on the cheek. "You'll be like the Virgin Mary, won't you?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I am innocently calm in terms of intimacy," Christina told him. "Taking care of myself for my future husband. Do you think this pregnancy will count?" She laughed. "Not for me, not at all." William looked at her with shining eyes. "Christina, my love, yes. And here's another thing. You'd better move to a town closer to the hospital, to the doctor's office. You never know. And by the way, what about your parents?" "I'll tell my parents I'm going to Milwaukee with a clear conscience." Christina lied. "They're simple people. They don't need to know everything." "That's right." William approved of her with a passionate smile. "Quite right. The fewer people who know, the better. I'll find you a fancy apartment. I'll always be there for you. A maid, daily care." Oh my God. He was so moved, he even wiped away a tear. "Rejoice, rejoice," thought to herself. Christina smiled softly at him. "Let's see how you sing when it's all in my hands." She had already worked out her grand plan of revenge and was not going to deviate from it one bit. She had to leave the lab temporarily. Christina wrote an application for leave of absence on her own account. She listened patiently to the oohs and ahs of her colleagues about her decision. She listened to Sebastian lecture at length about how these very unpleasant procedures and 9 months of her life were not worth any money, and did it all on her own. Finally, the decisive day came. The day in which she would have in her hands the fates of these 2 people who had once taken the lives of her parents. She wasn't sure about Kelly, but she wasn't the least bit sure that she knew and was covering for her husband. He himself had hinted to her that he couldn't divorce so easily because she was blackmailing him with some old story. "Christina, how are you doing there?" asked an employee who had come to perform the procedure, peeking into the dressing booth. Christina, who was just turning in her hospital uniform, smiled. "Yes, that's all right. Thank you. You're not worried at all." Compassionately asked her Molly, with whom they had become more or less friends during the time they worked together. Well, no, that wasn't the right word. Christina wasn't going to be friends with anyone here. Why should I worry? I am in good hands, she laughed, wanting to turn it into a joke. Half an hour later, everything was finished, and Christina was taken to her room, where she was to spend a few hours in a horizontal position. After that, you could leave and spend your time as usual. The examination, which will show whether the embryos have taken root, will take place 1 week later. If there is no result, a repeat in another 3 days. If not even then it's all over again. Christina was very hopeful that her young and healthy body would accept tiny lives all at once. Yes, they implanted 2 viable human embryos at once. This is often done to increase the chances that at least one of them will take root. William and Kelly met her in the room with a huge bouquet of roses. They looked like a happily married couple, And if you didn't know the real situation, you might have thought so, looking at the way the two of them were shining. "Here comes our mommy," said cheerfully Kelly. "But how are you, honey?" "I'm fine," Christina smiled at her. "I feel great. God willing, God willing." Kelly closed her eyes and mumbled some kind of prayer. And William, looking at her with a disgruntled expression on his face. "So outsiders out." Another staff member, Christina, entered the room. "Now we need peace and rest. Let's go, let's go." Dutifully, the Thompson couple responded. "So long, everybody." "Christina, thank you," sincerely thanked the woman Christina. "They've been racking my brain with their mawkishness." "You signed up for this." The woman shook her head. "Now bear with me." "Yes, but there's a limit to everything," she grinned. "I didn't sign up to listen to them around the clock. I'll just let them do what they want. Wouldn't it be a shame to give them up?" The woman hesitated. After all, she was carrying a child under her heart for 9 months. "Yes, but not mine," Christina said sharply. "That's it. I want to rest. I got it. I got it." The employee walked out and closed the door behind her. Christina sighed. She threw herself on the pillows and closed her eyes. It seemed to her that she could almost physically feel how inside her 2 tiny living creatures, hostile to her, were trying with all their might to take root. And yet she sincerely hoped that they would succeed. She was left in the room until morning because her temperature had risen slightly. "It happens," the doctor who performed the procedure reassured her. "It is normal, in principle. But just to be on the safe side, you need to be monitored." Christina didn't mind. She didn't care where she spent her time here or in the new and comfortable apartment William had rented for her. The apartment was in a new apartment complex almost in the center, with a gorgeous view of one of the many canals of Street Petersburg. There she was to live until the birth. But she was not going to waste her time and signed up for training courses at the university. And now she was studying the textbooks in preparation for her future enrollment. That first night spent in a hospital room, she had a strange dream, as if she was standing in a dark corridor and there was nothing and no one around. There was nothing, but then a faint light comes on in the distance. And in that light, she sees 2 creatures. They come closer and closer, holding hands. And it becomes clear to Christina that they are 2 small children, a boy and a girl. There in the dream, she can even make out their faces. But when she awoke, she remembered almost nothing. Only vague, indistinct images. But it seemed to her that something had changed. She put her hand on her stomach and listened to the sensations. Suddenly, she thought she felt a faint tremor. It was as if a small vein was throbbing. Of course, no palpation at such a young age would tell her anything. But Christina still believed that all went well, and a new life took hold inside her. A follow-up examination and ultrasound confirmed her confidence. Both embryos safely implanted. The joy of William's potential parents could not end. Christina was literally flooded with all kinds of gifts everywhere. Everywhere you looked in her new apartment, there were bouquets, lying folds, and boxes in beautiful packages. The refrigerator was stocked with delicacies. But she didn't want anything at all. Even strange. Pregnant women always want something, don't they? Maybe it wasn't time yet. Christina decided. And she went off to study pathology and anatomy. Her studies were interrupted by a phone call, and she frowned annoyed. She frowned, reaching for the phone, expecting it to be William. But the screen showed another name, Adriana. The girl rejoiced. "How are you?" "I'm fine." A familiar voice answered her. "And you, where have you been? You don't call or write for a week." "Yes, I have a lot of work," Christina said. "But I'm fine. I'm just studying anatomy. I'm getting ready to go to college." "Good for you." Adriana's voice still sounded a little anxious. "You know, I had the strangest dream today. Silly even." Christina was silent without uttering a word. And Adriana continued, "As if you were born with twins. Can you imagine? Maybe someday." The girl laughed to hide her surprise. How could she feel it? "But right now I'm not in the mood for kids." "Oh, all right." Adriana was clearly relieved to hear that her sweetheart was doing well. "So you're doing fine. Don't worry, please. I'll say goodbye then. Don't disappear. Call me once in a while." "Okay, Honey, of course, of course. Excuse me, please. And Christina hung up. She was left with an unpleasant residue after this conversation. And she decided it was time for the next step in her plan to text William right away, asking him to meet her. He flew in like he was on the wings in about 20 minutes, as if he was going to do it on purpose. But how was my favorite girl in the world? He hugged her and kissed her, and Christina had to endure it. But on the other hand, circumstances had worked out so well that at least she wouldn't have to endure more intimate contact with him. And she was willing to do even that, just to get her way. It's all right. Don't worry about it. Christina looked at him fondly, as she could only bring herself to do so. Will, we need to talk to you about this. Chances are both babies will be born safely. At least I really hope so. Of course they will. He interrupted her and began to cover her palms with kisses. You are my gift of fate. Wait, she pulled away from him gently. But I'd like one of these kids to stay with me, you know? You agreed with Kelly that she would only take one, didn't you? Yes, and the other will be you and me, my darling. William was glowing with happiness. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I talked to a lawyer. Legally, she could take both of them. You and I have to protect our own. With a worried face, Christina said, playing anxious. To keep me calm, you know what you want. Just say the word and I'll do it. We need to prepare in advance the papers for your and her divorce, and at the same time about our marriage, so that she signs them. As soon as the children are born, and we too, to get married right away well. And most importantly, we'll have to bribe the doctors to tell her that the second child is dead. What for? William wondered. So that she is guaranteed to take only one. Don't you understand? Christina looked at Eugene anxiously and bewildered that he really did not get it. She also needed a guarantee that she could influence him. And for that, she needed his own child. By the way, could you want a son or a daughter? She asked him cheerfully. To lighten the mood a little, a son. He smiled dreamily like a boy. And hair. Somehow I think they are of different sexes. Christina told him. Then it's decided. Talk to the doctors beforehand. Don't let them show our hair to her and tell her he's alive. Okay. What? That I have the foresight. William admired wholeheartedly. The time of delivery approached unnoticed. Closer to the due date, Christina became very disintegrated. Her huge belly would pass into the room half a minute before herself. If she walked through the door, the babies felt great, and their surrogate mother's back fell off. Her legs swelled, and she was dizzy for the last 3 months. That's why she was placed in a hospital ward for the preservation of children. There is no danger yet, the doctor said at the examination. But for you, you can develop preeclampsia on the background of water. So we'll do a planned cesarean. Okay, agreed Christina. I don't care what's best for the babies. She continued to maintain her rainbow image. And William and Kelly sat next to each other and smiled contentedly. The contractions started a week ahead of the doctor's deadline, and they had to do not a scheduled, but an emergency C-section. Christina had a high fever, and she was in terrible pain while the doctors tried to bring it down. Finally, she was taken to the operating room and anesthesia was administered. The world blurred into a blur of color and moved sideways. And before my eyes remained only a bright white glow, huge lamps and blurred, as in a dream, the hands of doctors. There was the first cry of a child, then another. The voices of the midwives merged into one uneven hum. Christina received an injection of something in her vein, and she passed out completely. Where am I? What about the babies? She said faintly when she came to. Everything is all right. William was beside her. He squeezed her hand lightly, but unfortunately, one didn't make it. How? Christina rose so rapidly from her pillow that she ripped the wires and tubes. And as a result, the system's medication rack nearly collapsed. Immediately, she saw Kelly next to her and remembered their agreement. So sorry, the woman wiped away her tears. But at least one is alive. My one little girl is my sunshine. Thank you for her, Christina. Would you like to see her? No, Christina grumbled. I shouldn't. And rightly so. Hurriedly agreed Kelly. But I must go. Get well soon. Wait, what about the documents? Concerned, said Christina. It's all right. William winked subtly. We have already signed everything. It's okay. Christina sighed in relief and then jumped up again. But we still have to now. He squeezed her hand soothingly and lowered his voice. Take your time, let her go. At the same time, the door of the room slammed shut behind Kelly, and Christina demanded that they bring the documents and our son. William took out his phone and dialed someone. 10 minutes later, a man in an expensive suit came and took a sheet of paper out of a folder. Please. It was a marriage certificate, signed by both Christina and William. Then they took out the baby's birth certificate, so she could see it with her own eyes. What shall we name him? Asked the happy father. Whatever you want, shrugged Christina. Any name will do for me. James, said William, smiling. James? Christina stunned. Not quite recovered from the operation yet. It was the name of her murdered father. Yes, after my grandfather. Important, said William. Bring it to me, Christina asked. Now a legitimate wife with the last name Thompson. I want to see my son's wrinkled red face in this cocoon. Didn't arouse any tender feelings in her, as she expected. But William walked around the room happy. My son, my hair, and so, turning the roll. Where is he going? How beautiful you are, how healthy you are. Okay, I want to get some sleep. Interrupted, calmly, Christina. His enthusiastic exclamation. Did you hear James? Asked the baby's newfound daddy. Mama told us she wanted to rest, but let's go. Finally, left alone, Christina tiredly closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. The first 2 weeks after the birth were very hard. Her stitches hurt. The tests were bad, but she bravely endured it all. In addition, they brought her baby to the breast every now and then. But Christina purposely did not do any of the things the nurses recommended to her, and the milk burned out. She suffered from mastitis and was put on antibiotics, and she was reluctant to leave the hospital so she could feel strong and free again. And so that long-awaited day came. Her stitches were removed, and she was discharged from the hospital with her baby. Happy William took them not to the apartment where Christina lived before the birth, but to his luxurious mansion in the country. A few more weeks passed quietly. She rested and went for walks, and numerous babysitters took care of the baby. Christina didn't have to do anything. After all, he was on artificial feeding for show. A couple of times a day, she would pick him up and cuddle him in front of William. And that was it. And she waited, agonizingly waiting for one decisive event to happen. And waited. On one warm spring day, a cavalcade of police cars with blinkers lined up outside William's mansion. With sirens, they drove up, and the entire quiet neighborhood agreed with that piercing howl. What the hell? Her husband looked through the second-floor windows irritated. Could it be that something had happened to the neighbors? But in a few minutes, the policemen were not at the neighbors, but in their yard, reprimanding the guard. William Thompson. In a metallic voice, a man in plain clothes, stepping onto the shiny parquet, wearing dirty street shoes. What's the matter anyway? William answered him angrily. Don't you know who I am? Do you? The man nodded. But you don't know who I am. Let me introduce myself. Major case investigator for the CID. Kurt Green, you're charged with the premeditated murder of Hamilton James and Hamilton Emily. You can call your lawyer. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law? Are you? What do you think you're doing? William shouted. And turning around, he said to his young wife standing next to him, Darling, this is some kind of misunderstanding. Don't worry, please, I'll sort it out, and I'll be right back. Good, quietly nodded Christina. I will wait for you. The man with his hands cuffed behind him was taken to a police car and sat in the back. The car drove away the entire cottage village and one of the babysitters. Shyly said Christina, looking at this scene from the window. Don't worry, so maybe it will all work out. It won't. Christina turned to her, and the woman rumbled in horror. The hostess's eyes glowed with wild rage, and there was a wide, joyous smile on her face. William Thompson was sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary. This was taken care of course, by his young fake wife. After their first meeting, she went to the prosecutor's office and the investigation department and demanded a new investigation into the death of her parents. Several attempts ended in failure. No one would listen to the girl, but she wouldn't give up and kept coming back, demanding justice over and over again. Finally, one of the investigators, a young, good-looking guy, delved into the situation and agreed to talk to her. Christina told him everything honestly about herself, about William's heinous crime, and about how he had paid off the investigation many years ago. "Understand, Christina, I'm entirely on your side," that fellow investigator told her. "But we don't have a single shred of evidence of his guilt, which means there's no reason to send the case back from the archives for reinvestigation." "Will there be evidence?" the girl said calmly. "Just give me a deadline." A few months later, she brought him a recording of a conversation between her and her new husband, William. On the tape, you could clearly hear her asking what it was that Kelly's ex-wife was blackmailing him with. "Yes, there was one thing," William replied, laughing. "Many years ago, in one city, had to get rid of a whole and brazen competitor. It was his own fault. He was so out of line. It was explained to him once, and he didn't understand the second time. Then the special people finished with him. And Kelly kept threatening him with her statement. She wrote it and gave it to her lawyer, with all the details, to keep me in line." "Where's that statement now?" Christina asked. "Aren't you afraid she'll give it away? What do you think?" "I'm not a fool, honey. It's been in my safe for a long time. I gave it to her in exchange for the baby, along with the divorce papers. There you go." In the new investigation, this statement was removed from the safe, and Kelly herself was brought in as a witness, and then an accomplice to the crime. The prosecutor proved that she knew of an atrocity being prepared, but did nothing to report it to law enforcement in time. She was given a little bit, only 2.5 years, and even that was some of her sentence. Her lawyer chipped in with mitigating circumstances of having a young child, no prior criminal record, and so on. What would happen to Kelly? Christina cared very little. Her main goal was accomplished. The murderer of her parents, William, had finally received the punishment she deserved. How happy was she, triumphantly appearing as the chief witness for the prosecution in the courtroom. "Yes, I know this man very well," she replied to the prosecutor's question, standing on the stand beside the judge. "This is my husband, William Thompson. I married him for one purpose, to avenge the death of my parents, Hamilton James and Emily, who were brutally blown up in a car on his brutal orders. Now you will rot in prison," she added, looking straight into William's eyes. "And your son James will go to the orphanage where I was raised at your mercy." William just clutched his head, looking at her with genuine horror. He was in deep shock. He could not have imagined the result of his acquaintance with the sweet and modest girl who had given him his long-awaited son. No, at last he barely made it out. "It doesn't work like that." Christina only grinned in response to his words and walked out of the hall with her head held high. A few months later, Thompson William was found dead in a prison cell. He had committed suicide. Kelly William, having served her sentence, left town on probation with her infant daughter. Little James Thompson was placed in an orphanage, where he spent the first few years of his life. Christina once again changed her last name, now permanently, to her father's last name, and she received a new passport. She successfully enrolled at the university in the department of her choice and studied excellently and happily. Most of Thompson's enormous fortune was confiscated, but even what was left was more than enough to live well. Christina bought herself an apartment and put the rest of the money in the bank at a good interest rate for such a large capital. And all seemed well. Everything worked out the way it was supposed to. But from time to time, she was unreasonably homesick, a vague sense of unease, of restlessness. What was it? She didn't understand for a long time, until one day she came across a little obituary in the city news column. Thompson Kelly, a former City Hall employee, had passed away untimely after a long illness. The following summarized the woman's services and the stages of her life's journey. Christina wondered after a few days, made inquiries, and it turned out that the little daughter Emily and William had also been placed in an orphanage. She felt a kind of turmoil in her soul after this news, and she decided to go on vacation to her hometown, to relax and visit Adriana. The first night in that tiny kitchen, Christina cried and told her kind teacher everything that had happened to her in that distant city. Then for a long, long time until morning, they sat up without sleep and talked, drank strong tea, cried, and talked again. And 2 weeks later, in one of the orphanages, the little big boy was brought to the room by a disgruntled teacher, where a pretty young woman was already waiting for him. "Hello," James said to him affectionately, this strange aunt. "Do you know who I am?" The boy sullenly shook his head. "I am your mother." She smiled at him. "I was lost, and now I am found. Forgive me, my son." "Mama." The boy cried out and threw himself on her neck. "Mother, I knew you would come right, so I came back for you." She put her arms around the boy and lifted him into her arms. "Now come on, let's go. We still have to pick up your little sister." Just like that, Christina, having drawn up all the necessary papers, became the official mother of 2 little orphans who had seen this world thanks to her. Although they were not her biological children, somehow, unbeknownst to her, she had managed to love the children of her sworn enemy as her own, and she became such a caring and dear mother to them. In addition, they had a grandmother, Adriana, who moved to live with her only real family.